Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about dealing with negativity, including negative reviews and feedback and anything else we can come up with. But before we do that, we'll do our usual rundown of what we've been doing. So we skipped last week, so for the last 2 weeks in writing. So Dave, what have you been up to?
Right. As usual, episodes of Seven Stones. So I published one last Saturday, one this Saturday. I've now got over 2,000 people following it on various places.
Wow,
so,
that's excellent.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, that is 2,000 people who at some point have gone, yeah, I might want to read that again, rather than 2,000 people who are reading it every week. But it means at least I'm not being spammy enough that anyone's decided to unsubscribe.
Yeah.
So
well, 2,000's excellent in any.
Yeah. So if I get any kind of conversion out of that at all for the compilations or word of mouth, that'll be reasonable. What else have I done? My pseudonymous project is now live and is kind of doing the same stuff that my previous things have done. So it looks like putting a big bang out on Google Plus and so on to say I've just released a book isn't really impacting my sales at all. So at least for me, the people who say if you talk about your own book, it has very little impact, seem to be right.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I see someone talking about their books, I just ignore it. I guess it's part of it's because I have about 600,000 authors in my circles and friends lists and things. But in general, I guess you're skeptical about someone talking about their own thing because, of course, they're going to say it's great.
Yeah, it wasn't talking about it saying it's great so much as just saying I've done it at all. It seems that social media isn't really shifting books for me. There aren't people out there who follow me who think, oh, he's released a new book, I'll buy it, who haven't already joined the mailing list. So it seems definitely as the mailing list rather than telling the world you've released a book that's shifting things, which is a useful fact, or it means something else completely and I need more data. But
I don't know. I from my experience, social media tends to be people trying to find out what I'm up to other than outside of the mailing list. So yeah, it is just subscribers, but they're just trying to bond, I guess, more. Say, okay, what are you doing day to day kind of thing. Was there anything else? Or that's more than enough, of course.
But that's various admin tasks. It's tax season, so I've only got until October to get my tax return in. So I thought I'd get that out of the way.
For me, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that I finished Blood Cruel a week ago. So in the previous week, I might have mentioned it on the previous pod. I'm losing track of when I finished what. So that's the first draft, and then as soon as I finished the first draft of that, I moved on to my programming project, which is writing related, but I don't want to kind of talk about it on air yet. and that was a lot of work. I noticed that. So normally I write before work, during lunch, and after work. So my normal day job is programming. So programming before work, during lunch, and after work was painful, because that's essentially me doing my day job for 12 hours a day. The writing is a different part of the brain, or a different focus, or whatever it is, which makes it much, much easier to do. Doing the same thing for 12 hours, that was kind of painful. So that project, I'm guessing it's kind of a thing I'm trying out. So if it's successful, I'll be expanding it and maybe announcing it here later. But if it's unsuccessful, then it'll die in anonymity.
It interests me.
Yeah, I don't know. The trouble is, I was saying this to someone in work. So they were saying, this is something that I could have a monthly subscription for authors to use if I put enough work into it, that it was like a proper system.
Yeah.
But then I'm essentially changing my day job programming for a, self-employed programming thing.
Yeah.
Because it then has all the maintenance and everything that goes with having a system online. So I'm kind of, on the one hand, it'd be nice to be self-employed and not working for someone else. There'd be more freedom in that. But on the other hand, I've heard the Scrivener guys made Scrivener so that they could write their own books better. And then Scrivener is so popular that they're just making better bits of Scrivener. So they've ended up just being programmers when they wanted to be authors. And I don't want to fall into that trap. The whole point of writing is to be an author. But anyway, I'll see how it goes. I don't know. I haven't decided any one way or the other. So that was kind of, it's vaguely writing related, but as I say, I can't really talk about what it is. So we'll move on to our topic. Negativity. So I'm, I guess, not the best person in the world to talk about this, because I don't take these things personally. If I get a negative review, it's just, oh, well, that wasn't one of my readers. The only thing I would say that was crucial for me was getting positive reviews for the first book when it first came out. So I got, the first 2 reviews I ever got were both 5 stars for The Bite on the Line. So that meant that then I knew someone liked it. If I'd have got a bunch of 1-star reviews as my first reviews, I'd have gone, okay, I'm not a good writer, and that might have had a negative impact.
Yeah, I think that external validation, however it comes, is a critical point at which you move from it being a hobby that you're considering taking seriously to actually being something that you're fully committed to doing, even when it starts to mentally, or if you're getting up an hour extra early to do it, physically hurt. So for me, it was having a story accepted into an anthology, that you actually get someone who's taking a whole bunch of stories and picks yours to put their money behind. Again, that makes you think, okay, I can write well enough that someone is prepared to put their money down. So yeah, I don't know if it has to be good reviews. It has to be a positive experience.
Yeah, and I think there has to be some kind of a balance. I think if you got incepted into an anthology, but the next 100 times people wrote back and said, this is horrible writing, I hate it, then you might go, okay, well, maybe that was a fluke, I guess.
I suppose, well, I think there are, possibly, to take it back a step, there are 2 sorts of negativity you can get, the general and the specific. So the specific negativity is someone saying, I didn't like this book, or I didn't like this character. But there's also the general negativity, which is more what we're alluding to here, of people saying, you'll never be a good writer. I think they're different things. I mean, the general, I think I expect everyone who's tried writing seriously, potentially even if they've got several books published, has encountered, you go somewhere, you meet someone new, they say, what do? You say, I'm a writer. And they go, oh, right. So which paper do you write for? Or they go, well, what do you do for a living then? Besides, not being a writer isn't something successful people do, which of course is an utter crock, because Stephen King is vastly successful. No one now is going to go up to Stephen King, ask him what he does, and when he says he's an author, go, okay, but what do you do for a living? Or, that's nice, your wife must have a good job. But
I guess it's people's experience in general is that 99% of the people who say they're a writer will then say, and I'm also a computer programmer by day, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, but that's the way to look at it, to deal with the negativity. That sort of, if people don't validate your experience of being a writer, it's not because they don't think you're a good writer. It's because their experience doesn't support anyone they know being a writer. So whilst Stephen King is a vastly successful author, and if you asked anyone, is Stephen King successful? Yes. Is he an author? Yes. There's a disjunction between you and Stephen King. In the same way, there's a disjunction between you and Ryan Giggs. And if you play football several times a week, if you're the best striker on your team, if that's what you really want to do, again, people are less likely to think, oh yes, football, you're a footballer, so you can be successful at that. So, yeah.
Depends. If you're our age, I think they might go, okay, but what's your real plan?
Oh, Joe, if you're our age, yes. But that's one of the great things about being an author. As long as your fingers still work, you're fit enough to do the job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I read about someone who was in their 70s and was being published for the first time, traditionally, but yeah.
But I suspect they decided to be an author when they were 20, and it took them 15 years of querying to...
Well, I think that's where I was going to say, that's where a lot of the negativity comes from, is that the majority of people have dreams in their teenage years that are then considered unrealistic when they get older. So my youngest son, who's 4, wants to be a fireman, which is not an unrealistic job, but if he also said he wanted to be an astronaut. So saying you want to be an astronaut, most people, if you are say 20 and say at that stage I want to be an astronaut, they'd go, and what are you going to do for money? That those kind of interesting rare jobs people consider aren't realistic. Even though, you could be working on your first doctorate or your second doctorate or whatever in order to become an astronaut. And it could be, something you're taking seriously.
Yeah.
And people will still say, yeah, but that's something that 4-year-olds say. It's not something that adults say. And the same with being a writer or an artist or a musician or anything that people consider I guess, an ambition that you would have as a child, that people would consider too interesting to be an ambition as an adult?
Well, that might be the core of it. But interesting jobs also tend to not pay well. Economically, there is a premium on jobs that no one really wants. And no one grows up wanting to be someone who calls about double glazing. So you probably have to pay someone slightly more to ring up to try and sell people double glazing than you would to get someone to ring up to do something fulfilling, like provide phone counseling, despite the fact that phone counseling is potentially objectively a more skilled task. So society probably does value astronauts, writers, musicians, and a whole lot of other jobs less than the skill level it takes to do them requires in terms of money, because they have this interest validation. So yeah, and that's possibly another way to avoid the negativity sticking, is to realize that, well, potentially the person who doesn't think it's a real job is thinking in terms of making money. And whilst any writer could make a huge amount of money, the chances that even if you start your publishing career early, you will have a career that makes you the same amount of money as, say, a lawyer who spends their entire life being a lawyer, is very small. So what you're getting potentially is they don't understand that you're taking a career that's paying less but is more enjoyable than a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I mean, my brother is a good example. So he went to college to do mathematics, and came out with a degree in mathematics, and then was offered a job as an actuary, which requires an extreme level of mathematics. An actuary, for anyone who doesn't know, is someone who predicts when people will die for the insurance industry. So they know that you're a smoker who is 35 years old and has 2 kids and blah, 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 means that you will die approximately when you're 73. And he then said, no, I don't want to do that because that's boring. So he then went and wrote plays. He writes for the theatre, which doesn't pay as well as an actuary. Actuaries get paid an incredible amount of money because it's the most deathly boring job. They could probably work out that they themselves would die earlier because of their boring job.
It's not that boring.
I don't know.
My wife's an actuary, and she gets to do really fun things like model terrorist attacks on major cities. So
lovely. So yeah, that's a sweeping generalization as well. Obviously, different people, different strokes for different folks, and everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think a part of it is not necessarily sour grapes. I don't think they're thinking of it in that terms. I think it's just, as you say, it's most people's focus as adults is, I'm successful when I earn the most amount of money. For instance, a lot of people in my day job would be, I've just got a better boat, or I've just got a better second house, or a faster car, or whatever it happens to be. Whereas I drove my Toyota until the repairs were going to cost more than it was worth. And then I bought another Toyota because it's the most reliable car. as someone in work said, that's officially the most boring car in the world. Buying a Toyota Avensis. But it's reliable, which for me was cheap and reliable was the most important thing. And again, everyone in work thinks I'm completely crazy to wake up at 5 a.m. and write, because for them they'd say, well, if you did an extra half an hour a day at the day job instead and worked overtime, you would earn more than you're currently earning from the writing. But that wouldn't be, for me, wouldn't be as fulfilling.
Yeah, well, the getting up an hour early to do writing is a great example in another way of how it's perception and not objective worth that creates people's judgment. Because if I say I'm getting up an hour early each morning to write for an hour, people will look at me oddly, think, well, is that really a productive use of time? If I say I'm getting up an hour early each morning so I can go for a run and have a shower, people will just nod and think that's a sensible use of time, despite the fact that going for a run every morning isn't making me any money. It's because people see exercise regime as being a valid thing to do as an adult. And again, if you get up early to take your children to school, that's an adulty thing to do. But using that time to make books isn't seen as an adulty thing, despite the fact that potentially it makes more money than some things that are traditionally adulty. So it is, people see these things are adult and these things are aspirational, dream wavy. And unfortunately, because of the way our society works, artistic pursuits, whether they're profitable or not, tend to be put into the dream thing, or into the, well, I did art at school, I did English at school, it's not actually that hard.
I think part of it as well is following the rules. So there are rules to adult life for anyone who's come up through school and then either gone to college or gotten a job and then gone to college or then gotten a job. That the rules are you work for someone else until you're 65, then you get a pension, and you can, like a lot of people would think, well, when I'm a pensioner, then I'll do what I want. Well, yeah. Why wait until you're a pensioner? I mean, it requires sacrificing something that is convenient. Like I rarely get to watch very much television anymore. Before I would have watched a few hours of television every night, or played a computer game or something. So it requires some sacrifice, but you can do what you want right now. And when you get to 65, you're not going to be a different person when you get to that age. You're not suddenly going to go, well, now I'll get up at 5 a.m. and write books. So I think part of it is thinking that the person who is doing that kind of thing is breaking the rules in some way. So that's negativity in terms of real life and people talking. But in terms of reviews and things like that, if we kind of...
in terms of reviews and things like that, well, the trick is to see the opportunity, I think. If someone says, I hated this book, there isn't even a romance subplot, let alone a good one, that this person didn't like the book. It's a 1-star review, potentially, but it's also useful data that tells you this is a book that will sell well to people who don't like this drive, sort of this Hollywooditis that every story has to have a romance interest.
Or it tells you that your cover and product description aren't conveying the genre correctly.
It tells you you're pitching. Well, That it depends on what else you're getting. And if you're getting a bunch of this is a great action adventure, your Amazon categories are like action adventure, war stories, and so on. So you're getting reviews from people who think it's the kind of book you think it is. Amazon think it's the kind of book you think it is. And then you've got people saying, well, it hasn't got a romance subplot. Then that's an opportunity to market more to people who don't like romance subplots. If you're getting a lot of this book doesn't have a romance subplot, then again, as well as that being a few people didn't like your book, and each review is only one person. It's not a whole cabal of people. But yeah, if you're getting several things saying the same thing, it's an opportunity to think, well, am I in the wrong category? Am I marketing to the wrong people?
It's important to mention as well, it's one person on one particular moment.
Yeah.
So that person may have been in a bad mood, or like, for instance, I will drop a lot of books when I'm writing a book because I'm just authored out, I guess, or fictioned out. So even little things will make me drop a book. I would never leave a review because of that. But other people may have had a stressful day and they try and read your book and they're just annoyed at life in general, and they're going, oh, stupid book, and then write something negative about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I had a review change myself. They put a 1-star review, and this book is terrible. It's short, this, that, and the other. And then I was, for a couple of minutes, I was really annoyed at that because I didn't have very many reviews. Like 1-star review, this book got into the hands of someone who really didn't like it. And even if you can take the long view on these things, there is that visceral moment when your lizard brain goes, person no like, you worthless, and you have to push past that. So, and then they came, and then I was checking my reviews again about a month later, and the 1-star review had gone, and I thought to myself, that's puzzling. Was it a troll then that put this up? Because that would be great if someone had gone through and wiped out all the troll reviews, because that would show the system was working. But I found the review was still there, but they'd edited it to a couple of paragraphs of description that said this book is a collection of short stories, so don't expect an epic sweeping narrative, and added some more stars. So obviously they wrote that review just at the point where they were really not in the mood for a short story collection. Potentially put their Kindle down and went off to do something else, but typed a scathing review on their mobile phone while they were walking or whatever. And then, because it was still on their Kindle, found it again later, picked it up and thought, well, actually, it's not that bad. So they put a better review out there. So it does happen. Admittedly, I suspect it's very rare that people go back to it. But staying on the subject of the psychology of reviews, there are lots of studies showing people tend to express criticism more than they express enjoyment, particularly, especially in the United Kingdom. We are known for our being able to mutter a complaint, but not being able to handle compliments in Britain. So if someone likes your book, thinks, I enjoyed that, they probably won't leave a review unless you've asked them to, or they really loved it, they think it's great. Whereas if something's off with the book, they're more likely, even if it's only a slight offness, to leave a review. So there is a slant towards negative reviewing.
Yeah, I think so. People tend to only leave reviews when they either hate something or love something. And they will try, I don't know, I guess it's some kind of psychological need to fix what someone else is doing. So if you see someone doing something wrong, you'll get the 1 stars for this is the opposite of what I like. So if there was a collected edition of Donald Trump's speeches, and I'd read it for some reason, I might give it a 1 star and say this is appalling. Or if you read something amazing, you might give it a 5 star. But there's also the tendency to try and help people. And you're not trying to help someone if it's a good book that you enjoyed but you don't love. You're trying to help someone if they're doing something that you think if they fix that, oh well, then the book would be good.
Yeah.
So for instance, going back to the romance subplot, you might think, well, every book I enjoy has a romance subplot. Therefore, this person is doing something wrong by not including one. They should have a romance subplot and their book would be more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So some of those you can ignore, but some of them are incredibly useful. The one I always go back to is span and spun. So the past tense of spin in the UK and Ireland for older people would be I span around. But in the US, it's I spun around, and the UK and Ireland, the more modern generation would say I spun around as well. So I got a review that said the past tense of spin is spun. I went, no, it's not. Spun is like yarn. Like if you were spinning out yarn, then the past tense would be spun. But if you're turning around, then it's span. And then, for an hour stewed on that, and then went to Google and said span versus spun, and Google said, yes, this is a very archaic version that's not in use anymore, and the correct version is spun. So negativity in that case isn't really, that's someone suggesting a fix which is applicable, which will actually has helped my books ever since. And there's plenty of examples of that. Working with you, Dave, then I've started using Oxford commas, which I didn't before. I'm now putting the apostrophe after the S of someone. So Higgins, for example, would have an apostrophe after the S and not an extra S at the end, which I guess is not overly negative. It's just a kind of a correction.
Well, it's I don't know. That's the thing. One person's negativity is another person's commentary. And I did several years when I was in court pretty much every day, working on behalf of other people rather than my own private crime spree. And certainly under the adversarial system, which is the one that the UK uses, the United States use, a lot of countries use, two lawyers who will go at it hammer and tongs. And they're polite, but it's an aggressive, if somewhat formal assault on the other person's position. But no lawyer is ever going to say that what the other side is doing is negativity. It's what you expect. They will attack every single chink in your argument. You will attack every single chink in theirs. And what you get out at the end is the things that stand up to hard analysis. And so, but to an outsider, it looks brutal. I had several clients who were very startled that we'd do this and they'd be expecting the judge to step in to calm it down, and the judge didn't. The judge would just watch, take a few notes, and then deliver the judgment. And it looked like this horribly aggressive thing. And then you get the judgment, the hearing's over, you walk out, and then you and the other side go off for coffee. And the client just can't handle that, because from their experience, it was a blistering argument, like you'd get on a soap opera. But for the lawyers, it was just, that's how you do it. So some negative reviews seem like negative reviews because the person who's writing it has a different approach to arguments, to delivering criticism, to using language for the person who's reading it. So,
I think a key point of what you have there as well is that it's the amount of times you've gone through it as well. So as a lawyer, you're doing this every day, whereas the client is seeing this for the first time.
Yeah.
So if you only have a single book out, then this is your only experience of reviews is, oh, someone just said this person's the worst author ever and they should never quit their day job and they should take this book off the market or whatever. Whereas I barely look at my reviews at all anymore. Like if I have a new book out, then I want to see what the first reviews are. And after that, I tend not to look at the reviews at all. Because at this stage, I'm going, well, I know that some people enjoy my books and some people don't. So that's the way it goes. Just ignore them. As I say, the first time a book comes out, I want to see what the first reviews are. And they're kind of slightly biased because they tend to be from my biggest fans who buy everything I read. So therefore, they're, of course, going to enjoy it. So I guess that's giving me a boost without showing me the negativity at all. But yeah, with volume comes a certain laissez-faire attitude as well, where you just go, well, even if you got a bunch of 1-star reviews on a book that said something, if I'd made a mistake in formatting or grammar editing or something like that, then I'd be very embarrassed. But if I got a bunch of 1-star reviews saying, I don't like this story because the hero dies on page 20 or something, then I go, yeah, but that's the way the book is.
The brilliant example of that, which we might have referred to in a previous podcast, is Joanna Penn, the Exodus, where a huge amount of negative feedback because it wasn't biblical. So people have just decided that, and well, it's not a biblical book. The cover didn't show it as being particularly Christian theory. The blurb certainly shows it as being action adventure. The sample would, because I've read it, and the first 20 pages or so are action adventure-y. So there's nothing about it that says this book should be Christian. But people were so fixated on it, it's called Exodus, that's what it has to be, that's what they didn't like. And they reviewed heavily on the basis of that. There's nothing to do about it.
No, that goes to reader expectations and getting negative feedback because of that. Like if I wrote a cowboy novel and had a picture of a spaceship on the cover, then it would be valid criticism, even if the product description says the year is 1874 and it's Texas. If there's a picture of a spaceship, people go, maybe the product description's wrong or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's, as I said in a previous podcast, I changed the name of my vampire one to avoid even mentioning gods. Joanna Penn herself said, if the Da Vinci Code had been called the Jesus Theory, then Dan Brown would have gotten the same negative feedback probably. People would have gone, this is anti-Jesus or not really to do with Jesus or whatever. The last thing I wanted to mention on negativity. Sorry, did I interrupt you there, Dave?
No.
The last thing I want to mention was critique groups, where they can be a pit of negativity if you're in the wrong one, which I was for a while. I guess nearly 10 years ago now. I was in a group where people would pick things apart because they weren't in their particular voice. And I was too inexperienced to know that that was what they were picking apart. So they would say, oh, well, I wouldn't have had such long paragraphs, or I wouldn't have had such short paragraphs, or I would have had this or that, or explained more of this or whatever. And not being too inexperienced, I didn't realize, well, okay, but you're not me. So therefore my book might have short paragraphs or long paragraphs or less dialogue or more dialogue or whatever it happens to be. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, that I think is another point about negativity that came out of doing a lot of legal hearings, but other people have found it in other fields, that certainly in the Western education systems, we're not taught as children how to separate disagreeing with a thing from disagreeing with a person properly. We put a lot of our self-esteem into our opinions. So if you have a favorite football team, if your favorite football team does well, you feel good. If your favorite football team does badly, you feel bad. But some of your self-esteem is tied up in that team. So if someone says that team is a bad team, you feel attacked, despite the fact that it's not actually anything to do with you. You have no control over how well the team plays. And that kind of thinking carries through all the way through childhood, all the way into adulthood. Most people never really shake it. Whereas in law, you get a case. Your job is to argue the case. Your job isn't to argue that, okay, my client did drive into into a parked car, but he's a decent bloke who takes care of his children, so he shouldn't have to pay for the damage because he's a good person. You're arguing the facts. This person who could otherwise be perfect caused an accident. That's no reflection on his perfection. That's just a statement of fact. And so some reviews, and I try very hard to do it when I'm reviewing a book, are about the book. They don't make a judgment about whether the author is a good person or not, or about the author's opinions. Because if the character has foul opinions, that doesn't necessarily mean the author has them. But not everyone has that training in separating. So sometimes when people say that your book is unspeakable, it's not because you're a bad person. It's because one of your characters is a bad person and they failed to separate properly. Or because they've said this character is foul and you haven't managed to make that disjunction in your head between the character you've written and yourself. So one or the other of you is passing the opinion of the book onto the opinion of a person, which hurts more. So
I mean, and it's common. Like you even see it. The thing that springs to mind, I just saw Hateful Eight, Quentin Tarantino's movie, yesterday, And he's been criticized a lot because his movies feature the N-word a lot. But the characters speaking the word are racists or drug dealers or whatever they happen to be who would use the word normally. That does not mean that Quentin Tarantino is a racist. It means that the character he's writing is a racist. But professional reviewers will say, oh, well, Quentin Tarantino is a racist because he loves using this word or whatever. So in that case, you're talking about one of the leading directors in the world and professional reviewers working for professional newspapers or TV shows or whatever. And even at that level, they're not able to separate the person from the work of art.
Yeah, so people who have it as a job aren't doing it perfectly. So if you get Joe Bloggs, who's bought your book on Amazon, read it, and thought strongly enough about the book to put a review, the chances that random Joe Bloggs will actually be better at writing a full critique than someone who does it as a job are very small. So most reviews, good or bad, aren't going to be perfect. So it's quite easy that someone writes what they think is a pleasant review for them to accidentally make it seem harsh. Grant,
so we've come to our usual stopping place, unless there was anything you wanted to add at the end there, Dave.
I did have a comment on a collection of Trump speeches that essentially I'd give that a reasonable review, not because I like Donald Trump's rhetoric, but because as a historical document, it's interesting. So that's the other thing, that what people are reviewing in your book, and this potentially applies more to non-fiction than fiction, might not be the same criteria that other people are using. So you review a book, you give Donald Trump's speeches a 1 star because you don't like his rhetoric. I don't like his rhetoric, but I might give it 2 or 3 stars because it's an interesting historical document, and I feel the experience of reading it has given me a better insight into why I don't agree with him. So
yeah, I mean, if you fast forward 20 years and obviously America's a nuclear wasteland at that stage, and there's a collection of Donald Trump speeches, then I might give it more stars because it would be, oh, look how they fell into this trap.
If I found a book in the middle of a nuclear wasteland, I would give up food and water to carry it with me, because I can't survive without a book. And if the only thing that was left to read was Donald Trump's speeches, then I'd be reading them. But, yeah.
Grant, so we'll end it there.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye for now.